If you have watched all the chapters so far, understood most of the concepts, and practiced a bit, then you understand the basics of how to model in 3D. But modeling is only half the picture. Our models need color, surface details, and material properties, which we took a look at a little bit in chapters 4 and 5 with our frying pan. But in order to make our stuff look truly good, we're going to need to make custom textures in a 2D application like Photoshop. Our textures need to have details that align specifically to our model. To accomplish this, our textures, or images, need to wrap around our mesh in a very specific way. Unwrapping our mesh for our textures is the process known as UV unwrapping or UV mapping. So let's jump right in with a short exercise first to get our heads around the concept. Then we'll unwrap our dagger for texturing. In this exercise, we're going to make a dice. This is a pretty common thing as a UV mapping demonstration, but it's a good one because it's simple and shows the concept well. The idea is to map this image of the 6 sides of a dice onto a box to create a dice. So I have here a simple max scene with a cube in it. And the first thing we want to do is get our texture onto this cube. So I'm just going to press M to bring up my material manager or material editor, and I am going to assign material to selection to assign this first material ball to my cube. And then I'm going to give this material a diffuse, like we did on the frying pan. I'm going to expand the maps category here. And then I'm going to click on none here next to the diffuse color. Now by default, when we click on none, it'll automatically check for us. So we actually don't need to check it. Then we're going to get our material map browser, and we're going to want to click on bitmap. Bitmap just means image. We're just loading an image that we've made. And now it gives us a little dialog to browse. So you're going to browse to your image, and here it is. Now in terms of what file you're going to want to use, targas and TIFFs are very often used in the video game industry, but we can certainly use JPEGs as well, although JPEG is going to be a lossier compression type than targas or TIFFs, and JPEGs don't store an alpha channel as easily as targas or TIFFs. Now if you don't know what an alpha channel is, it is essentially a 4th channel to our standard R, G, and B 3-channel images. This 4th channel can really be used for anything, but more often than not, it's going to be used for transparency, where black is completely transparent and white is completely opaque, and all the gray values in between dictate varying levels of opacity. Alright, so now that we have that loaded, you'll notice that nothing happened to our cube. Well, that's because we need to show standard map in viewport in order for us actually to visualize it in our viewport. But before I even click that, I want to go to the parent of my material, because now that I have loaded this texture in the diffuse, I have dove down into the ranks of my material here, and I am now in the diffuse map. So I want to click on go to parent here, and that will actually take me to the top of my material. And then we click show standard map in viewport, and you'll notice our texture is now on our cube, which is good and dandy, but our texture is not mapped onto our cube correctly. We need to modify this object's UV map. So to do that, we need to add a modifier called Unwrap Uvw. So once we add that, we expand it. So once we add that, we can click on this little button here in the toolbar called Open UV Editor. And when we do, we'll actually see what the UVs of this particular mesh look like. In the top right corner of this window, it'll actually give you a list of all the images that are on this object. So you can click on it just as a visualization to see the image as you're working. And our UV map is going to be a flat representation of our 3D object. Now, you'll notice we have the entire texture mapped to each plane. Well, if you look at our UV map, we don't really have much going on except one square on our entire map. To modify our UVs, and we're going to get right into it here, we can select things just like we can in our 3D view, And we have our three tools, just like we do in our 3D view. We have move, rotate, and scale. They work a little bit differently than they do in our 3D view. We don't really have gizmos, but I never use any of these. I always use this fourth one, which is Freeform Mode. And Freeform Mode is basically a tool that does all of these things all in one. So you notice this red box we have. We can click right in the middle of it to move it around. And you'll notice that as I move this box around, you can see our texture moving around on our 3D object. And that's because we are moving the UVs around. Therefore, this texture is being mapped to our box differently. We can click all the way in the corner of this box to scale it. We can hold Control to constrain its proportions. And then we can click on one of these midpoints on the edges of our box to rotate our UVs here. So in about 5 seconds, you guys will probably be pretty comfortable moving things around in your UV editor. Now, to really get down to actually mapping this object, we're going to need to select subcomponents in our 3D view. We can expand this Unwrap Uvw by clicking this plus, just like we can on an editable poly. And you'll notice we have our sub-object modes, vertex, edge, and face, just like we do when we expand an editable poly. The difference is these sub-object modes are not for modeling. When we make a selection, for instance, a face in face mode, we can't do anything to it. We don't have any modeling tools to do anything to it. We can't use any gizmos on it. There are no gizmos. We can press W, E, or R and nothing will happen. That's because all these modes are pretty much making selections and then unwrapping them in various ways. The only tools we have here are unwrap tools. So I want to show you guys the most basic and probably the most useful unwrapping tool, which is this quick planar map, this little plane with a lightning bolt and an exclamation on it. Quick planar map is just going to, based on what we have selected, it'll kind of spawn a plane the best way it can, then project our selection from that plane. So if I select these two faces, you'll see that we have this yellow plane here, just the outline of a yellow plane. And that yellow plane is a pre-visualization as to what our quick planar map is going to do. Now we're not in quick planar map mode. There is no mode for it. And by default, it just shows us this quick planar map pre-visualization because Autodesk knows that it's such a common tool that even when we make just normal selections, it'll show us what this quick planar map is about to do. And if I press quick planar map, you can see on our UV editor window here that it's just projected our selection from this plane here. Now this might be a little confusing, but it'll become more clear as you guys mess around with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just select every plane and press quick planar map here so that each side of our box is just mapped independently. Now it looks like that we just have one square in our UV editor, but actually we have all 6 of our faces just piled on top of each other. And this looks a lot like the default UVs for this box came, but we did need to do that quick planar map so they were all broken apart from each other. If that doesn't make any sense, it's totally fine. You don't even need to worry about it. Just quick planar map each face. Now you can just start selecting any face and attempt to map it to one of these squares here. So I'm just using my scale tool in freeform mode, holding Control to constrain its proportions, and I'm just going to move it over 1. And you'll see in our 3D viewport, we have successfully mapped that side of our box to that particular on our texture sheet. Now I'm going to do it again for the next one. I'm not sure how the continuity of a dice goes, like in terms of which numbers are where, but it doesn't really matter for this exercise. So I'm just going to go through and select each plane and just move it on to a new number. Simple as that. And that's all there is to it. Now if you're getting a little bit of edge here, it's because you're UVs are spilling over onto something else. So to avoid that, just make sure your UVs aren't spilling over onto any other things. Now, if we're all done, we can, if we want to, convert this to an editable poly. And now we have a dice. So now that we understand a little bit more about UV mapping, we're ready to start to take on this dagger here. The first thing I want to do is get rid of all this other stuff I have in my scene, because I'm just going to be working on the dagger. So a really good trick for that is just to select the object that you want to work on and just say isolate selection. That'll make it nice and neat for you, so you don't have to worry about all the other objects in your scene. Then by default in Max 2012 we have this crazy viewport lighting going on. I kind of want a more simple one right now, so I think I'm just going to change it to shaded, and that'll just have less stuff going on. And then I'm simply going to add an Unwrap Uvw Modifier. Now once you have the modifier on there, you can say open UV editor in the tool column here and take a look-see at what we have. And what we have is basically just a giant jumble mess of nothing. These are just default UVs and they are never going to be of any use. We need to skillfully tell Max how we're going to want this thing to be unwrapped. We're going to want to lay things out logically so that we kind of understand what we're looking at. Like, we can't just unwrap things in random ways and just have a scatter shot of all the different polygons here on our mesh, because then we'll have no idea how to texture it. When we get into Photoshop, we won't know where to put metal texture and where to put leather texture and whatnot. So we need to make sure that we lay this out logically so we can actually interpret it. But on the other hand, we also want to place our seams in places that are not going to be incredibly intrusive to the model. And this would be more important on something that was more organic. This thing has some pretty easy places to actually place seams, so this won't be too hard on this particular model. And also, we want our UVs to cover our entire UV space. Now, the reason for that is whenever we have unused UV space, that means we have unused texture space. So if all of our UVs are right here, if we perhaps unwrapped this sword, like we selected all these faces and then just did a quick planar map, well, that looks an awful lot like a sword. If we did that for both sides, let's say, and just placed this guy right here, well, that's very easy to interpret. We know exactly what goes where. However, among the other millions of problems this thing has, there's just this huge space here where we're not using any of these pixels, and that's a problem, particularly for video game textures, because every texture you add is using up computer memory and computer resources. And the more textures we have, the more memory we're going to use, and the slower our computers are going to run, the lower our frame rate is going to be for our players. So when we have a bunch of wasted space, the computer doesn't care where the UVs are. The computer needs to cache the entire texture no matter what we do. All it cares is that there are this many pixels, and it needs to remember all of their values and whatnot, and so it's going to use exactly that much memory, no less, even if we're only using a small piece of the texture. So in that sense, leaving large spaces of unused texture is wasteful. So we're going to have to try to strike a balance between using all of this texture, but still laying things out logically and proportionally, and have things cut up in a way that will not yield horrible seams. So if none of that makes sense, I understand. UV mapping is a pretty abstract concept. Let's just dive in here. So these UVs are just garbage UVs. We'll have custom unwrapped this entire thing by the end. So the first thing I want to start with is the easiest thing, which is the blade. Now the blade is not completely flat, but it's pretty flat, and it just has two sides. So it's going to be pretty easy just to select each side. Actually, we could probably just drag a marquee over the whole thing, and we have this little toggle called ignore backfacing, which means it's not going to select through to the other side. So now we have the entire selection of this front face of the blade, and we can just run my very favorite UV tool, which is Quick Planar Map. And that's just going to project this entire side of the blade flat down, and that's going to work just perfect for us. Usually how I work is I get all the components unwrapped, and they're just kind of a big mess all around this UV area, and then I kind of fit them all in like a puzzle into this space. So now let's do the other side. Just going to marquee this entire side of the sword and run a quick planar map. We could put this blade right here, and they could just be side by side, but that's going to be a little bit wasteful for texture space because we can never see both sides of the blade at the same time unless for some reason we're head on, like we're about to get the top of our head chopped off or something. So it would be very strategic to actually just put these UVs right on top of each other. If we do that, then these UVs are going to be referencing the same pixels, and therefore they're going to be receiving the same texture, which is good because they're both the same thing. They're a sword blade. So this is going to be a good move for us. Now they don't line up perfectly, but that's okay. We can just fix this end here by simply going into Vertex Mode. We have all of our different modes down here. We have Polygon, Edge, and Vertex in our UV window, just like we do in the 3D view. And we can just select this little tip and kind of move it more in line with the one below it. And that's going to work out just fine for us. Now, the next part is going to be, well, the guard, but let's hold that thought for a second and move on to this grip. Now, this grip is going to be an excellent opportunity to learn a new unwrapping tool, but first we need to select it. So we could go through and select every single one of these polygons, but that's obviously very tedious. And we have a very easy way of selecting it. We don't have element mode like we do in Editable Poly, but we do have this little toggle called Select by Element. And if we switch it, anything we click on, it'll immediately select the whole element. And then we can just decheck it as we move forward. So we have the whole thing selected now, but how do we unwrap it? Well, there's a very good tool for unwrapping cylindrical type things, and it's the Cylindrical Projection Map. What it's going to do is attempt to slice, imagine like this thing is a roll of paper. It's going to attempt to slice a line right here and then kind of unroll it like we could for like a toilet paper roll or something like that. So when we click Cylindrical Map, our UVs update and show us kind of what it's doing. And it looks very odd. It doesn't look anything like if this was a roll of toilet paper and we split it right here and unrolled it. It's looking very strange. Well, we have this little yellow pre-visualization of what our cylinder actually looks like, and you'll notice that it is a cylinder. It's kind of a oblong cylinder, and it's orientated the wrong way. So we just need to make sure to orientate this the correct way. There's this neat tool called Best Align right here. It looks like the little move gizmo under the align options, and that sometimes work, but I'm clicking it now and it simply wants to do the same thing. It's not really understanding how this cylinder is working. So we have all these axes and we can just click on them, and well, there's one, but that one's wrong too. So it looks like X is going to be correct. And now you'll notice that our cylinder is orientated correctly, but it's a little bit askew. It's kind of running diagonally a little bit, and we can modify this cylinder if we like. When we're in cylindrical map mode, you'll notice it's popped in blue. We really can't do anything. We can't move UVs. We can't select anything else. What it wants us to do now is deal with this cylinder. So we can use our normal transform tools to kind of move this cylinder to be exactly where we want it to fit our cylinder. So it's usually a good practice to make the cylinder a little bit bigger than the actual cylinder, and perhaps a little bit longer as well. And when we're all done and we have everything mapped the way we want to, and you can see that this indeed looks exactly like a split open roll of toilet paper, we can see these lines here, which are our lines that we've put in this thing, like the little space between the leather, and that's going to work out perfectly for us. All we need to do is click cylindrical map again, and then everything will be back to normal, and we'll have this great cylindrically unwrapped thing. And now we can put texture on this and it'll wrap that texture around our cylinder. So now let's move on to the guard. The way I'm thinking to do the guard is kind of split this thing along its edges here and just unwrap it like that. So I'm just going to select this whole front face. But with this front face, I also want these little beveled edges. So instead of going through and selecting them, I can just use our Grow tool, just like we have in Editable Poly. We have it here. It just has a cute little icon. We can just grow our selection, and it'll select all the adjacent polygons and give us that little beveled edge. And then I'm just going to run a quick planar map. And you'll notice this shape looks remarkably similar to the shape we just selected. Since they are all pointing in the same direction, that's going to work great for us. Note that if we had selected both sides and tried to do it all in the same pass, you can see that our pre-visualization here, our yellow pre-visualization, as we select more of the other side, starts to get more and more askewed. And eventually, if we had selected this entire side, it would be completely flat, which would give us really awful UVs. I mean, those UVs wouldn't work at all. We would essentially have two little lines. So we need to make sure to just select one side at a time, and we always need to be aware of this little yellow pre-visualization and how it's going to project our selection. So I need to grow my selection again here and do a quick planar map. So there's that, and I'm just kind of going to orientate it upright so it's not all diagonal in my UV space. Then I'm going to do the other side. Just select it here and grow and quick planar map. And now this is going to be the same story as our blade. So we have these two sides, and we don't really want them to use different pixels because they're the same thing. And although it's going to be a little bit, it's going to be a little bit fake to have both sides have exactly the same features, but it's really not going to be a problem because we can never see both sides at the same time. And nobody's going to notice if this side has the exact same scratches as the other side. So we can just put those right on top of each other here. And there we go. It's not perfect, but I'm sure that'll do. Now we have the top and bottom to do. And quick planar map it. Just for now, kind of put it right under this. And I'm going to select the other side. I don't want to select this bevel because this bevel is already included. You'll notice if I select that polygon right there, you see that that polygon is already on the edge of this other island we've created, so we don't want to mess that up. Now we want to select the other side. A cool tool for selecting flat surfaces is this planar angle selection tool. When we enable it, when we click, it'll kind of select polygons that are all coplanar with each other. And that'll be nice for selecting these kind of flat parts. And I'm going to go ahead and quick planar map that. And align it with our other one. Very nice. And lastly, we have these little two ends here, which I'll just select one and quick planar map and the other and quick planar map. And here they are. I'll just put those somewhere for a while. Okay. And now we have our pommel. So I'm going to unwrap this thing similarly to the way I did the guard. And this select by planar angle is really going to help us out for this. So if we select that, that's really nice because it's going to select that entire side for us. And all we need to do now is just run a quick planar map. And there we go. Just move that off for now. Select the other one, quick planar map. And I'm just going to put all four of these sides on top of each other so that they're all referencing the same pixels. Okay, so that's that. And now we have to do this little part here, and continuing to use my planar angle tool to get all of that. And then we do have this little bevel, which I want to include on this UV island. So I'm just going to use the Grow tool and probably grow it again to get that oh no, it looks like that last little part was on our sides, so I'm just going to shrink it again. And it looks like still a little bit of it is on this other UV island, but I'd rather have that little bit on this UV island. I think that'll make more sense. So I'm going to run a quick planar map on that. Just kind of put that somewhere. Maybe put these kind of together. And again, I'm just putting them wherever for now, and then once we have all of our components unwrapped, I'll make this UV editor nice and big, and we'll start to pack them all onto this little sheet we have. Okay, now I'm going to unwrap this whole bottom piece, and I just used select by element to select this pancake cylinder here. Now I'm going to decheck it as I select this bottom plane here, because I don't want to select this whole element. I just want that guy, and I want to have this guy in my selection too. Okay, now I'm just going to grow the selection, perhaps grow it again. Okay, now I'm going to shrink it and shrink it again. And now we have a nice clean selection, and I'm just going to quick planar map all that. Here's the entire bottom part of our pommel. Okay, so that's our entire sword, but we do have some random bits here on our UV map. We see these random bits which we have no idea what they are, so we can just select them and see what highlighted to kind of see what they are. And it looks like this one goes to here. So instead of like trying to fit that in, you know, it's going to be a little artifact. It's not going to look nice, but it's so small, it'll probably be fine. I'm just going to kind of stuff that right on top of this UV island, because that's roughly where it is anyway. Now let's see what this little goodie is. And I just press Z to zoom to it. And it looks like I missed this bevel here. So I guess I'll just select this whole side again and grow the selection, because I obviously didn't do a good job on this. There, now we have it selected properly, and do a quick planar map. Then I've got to put it back where it ought to be. Very good. So now we don't have any random little bits anywhere, so our entire sword is unwrapped. And now it's just a matter of arranging these UV islands in our 0 to 1 UV space. And in the next and final chapter of this tutorial, we will do just that, as well as finally get to see what this dagger looks like completed and textured.